The hum of the electrostatic handcuffs was the only sound Marcus could hear as the elevator ascended. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor numbers flickering rapidly. Level 150, level 160, level 170. Every floor higher than 50 meant you were leaving the slums of Sector 9 and entering the world of the elite, the sky dwellers who viewed humans like Marcus not as people, but as biological machinery. Today was his 30th birthday, a milestone that usually marked the day a worker was retired, forcefully. Marcus had spent the morning waiting for the execution droid to knock on his rusted metal door. Instead, two heavily armored guards in pristine white suits had dragged him out, shoved him into a transport pod and brought him here. The Grand Spire. The heartbeat of the Galactic Dominion. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wasn't a criminal, just a mechanic who fixed atmospheric scrubbers, but in the Dominion, being poor was the only crime that mattered. The elevator chimed softly, a sound too pleasant for a man walking to his death. The doors slid open. Marcus expected a firing squad or a judge. He didn't expect a party. The room was cavernous, bathed in a deep ethereal blue light that seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the neon lights that stripped the ceiling. In the center of the room stood a single high-tech chair, looking more like a throne than a seat for a prisoner. And floating above it, projected in shimmering holographic text, were the words, "Happy Birthday." Marcus blinked, confused. He stepped forward tentatively, the guards behind him nudging him with the barrels of their pulse rifles. "Sit," one of them commanded. Marcus didn't argue. He sat in the chair, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white. The room was freezing. Suddenly, the wall in front of him hissed and split down the middle. Heavy machinery groaned as a platform rose from the floor. Fog, thick and smelling of ozone and preserved lilies, rolled out towards him. Marcus pressed his back against the chair, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. This was some twisted game before they killed him. Through the mist, two silhouettes emerged. They were tall, far taller than any human woman, with slender, elongated limbs that moved with a predatory grace. As the fog cleared, Marcus's breath hitched in his throat. They were breathtaking, but in the way a thunderstorm is breathtaking, beautiful and terrifying. Their skin was pale as moonlight, almost translucent, with faint blue veins glowing beneath the surface. They wore dark, skin-tight ceremonial armor that looked like it was grown rather than made, accentuating their curves while offering lethal protection. But it was what extended from their backs that made Marcus realize he was no longer dealing with standard biology. Enormous, leathery wings, tipped with razor-sharp hooks, spanned out behind them, twitching slightly as they adjusted to the room's air. Their eyes were solid crimson, glowing with an internal bioluminescence that pierced right through the gloom and locked onto Marcus. Alien vampires. The Vrukai. The apex predators of the Galician Rim. They were myths in the lower sectors, monsters used to scare children into obedience. And now, two of them were standing 10 feet away from him. A voice boomed from the shadows, smooth and synthesized. "Citizen 749 Marcus. You have served the Dominion with a 99.8% efficiency rating for 12 standard cycles. Your genetic stability is rare. Today the High Council rewards loyalty." The two Vrukai women stepped forward in unison. They didn't walk, they glided. On the left stood one with hair like spun silver, falling in waves down to her waist. On the right, her counterpart had hair as dark as the void between stars. They stopped flanking him, their towering forms casting long, intimidating shadows over his seated figure. They held out their hands not to attack but in a gesture of offering. In their palms rested small, glowing cubes. "Meet Nyx and Aera," the voice continued. "They are of the royal bloodline reclaimed from the War of Ashes. They are not guards. They are not servants. They are your companions. Happy birthday, Marcus." The absurdity of the situation made Marcus dizzy. He was a man who struggled to afford synthetic protein paste for dinner, and the government had just given him two super predators as a gift? It was a death sentence wrapped in a ribbon. "I can't accept this," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking. The Vrukai on the left, Nyx, tilted her head. Her silver hair shifted, and her red eyes narrowed slightly. She leaned down, her face inches from his. He could smell her scent, like rain on hot asphalt and something metallic like blood. "Refusal is treason," she whispered. Her voice was melodic but carried a vibration that he felt in his bones. "And treason is punishable by liquidation." The dark-haired one, Aera, stepped closer on his other side, her wing brushing against his shoulder. It felt cold and hard like leather stretched over steel. "Take the controls," Marcus, Aera said, nodding to the glowing cubes in their hands. or we will be forced to dispose of a master who cannot lead. Marcus looked from the cubes to the guards by the elevator. The guards had their weapons raised. He had no choice. Trembling, he reached out and took the cubes. As soon as his skin touched the devices, a jolt of electricity shot up his arms. The cubes dissolved into a liquid nanoswarm that burrowed into his palms. He gasped, clutching his hands to his chest, but the pain vanished as quickly as it had arrived, replaced by a strange humming connection in the back of his mind. He could feel them. He could feel Nyx's cold curiosity and Aera's simmering aggression. They were bonded to him. Transfer complete, the disembodied voice announced. Asset 749 Marcus is now the designated handler. You have been reassigned to Sector 4 Habitation Unit Alpha. Do not disappoint us. The floor beneath the chair shuddered, and the platform began to descend, taking Marcus and the two creatures with him. As the blue light of the chamber faded into the darkness of the transport shaft, Marcus looked up at the two women. They were staring down at him, their expressions unreadable, their glowing red eyes the only light in the descending elevator. What do you eat? Marcus asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. It was a stupid question, but his survival instinct was screaming it. Aera smiled, revealing elongated, needle-like fangs that glistened in the dark. We require high-grade energy, she said softly. Or biological fluid. Usually the council provides synthetic plasma. But since we are now yours. She let the sentence hang in the air, heavy with threat. Nyx chuckled, a low, throaty sound. Do not worry, little human. We are programmed not to drain our handler. Completely. The descent seemed to take hours. The silence in the transport pod was suffocating. Marcus tried to process his new reality. He had been moved from the slums to Sector 4, the mid-tier district. It was better, safer, but he was bringing two monsters into a residential block. The elevator finally ground to a halt, and the doors opened into a spacious, dimly lit apartment. It was luxurious compared to his old cell, with a window that looked out over the neon-soaked city, raining acid rain. Marcus stood up, his legs shaky. He walked into the apartment, and the two Vrukai followed him, their wings folding tight against their backs to fit through the doorway. They looked out of place, ancient and lethal against the backdrop of cheap futuristic furniture. This is small, Aera noted, running a clawed finger along a dusty table. It will suffice, Nyx countered, walking to the window and pressing her hand against the glass. It is better than the stasis pods. Marcus turned to face them. He needed to establish boundaries or he wouldn't survive the night. The nanolink in his mind told him he could issue commands, but he was terrified to test it. Look, Marcus started, trying to sound authoritative. I didn't ask for this. I don't know what the council wants with me or why they gave you to me. But if we are going to live here, we need rules. Nyx turned from the window, her eyes flashing. Rules? She moved with blinding speed. 1 second she was by the window, the next she was in front of him, her hand gripping his throat. She lifted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. Her wings flared out, knocking over a chair. The council put a leash in your hand, human, but do not mistake a leash for control. We are Vrukai. We conquered star systems while your ancestors were still discovering fire. Marcus choked, clawing at her hand. His vision started to spot. The connection in his mind flared, a panic button. Instinctively he pushed a mental command, release. A shockwave of blue energy pulsed from his hands. Nyx gasped, her eyes widening in shock. Her grip faltered and she dropped him. She stumbled back, clutching her chest, hissing in pain. Aera, who had been watching, stiffened, her fangs baring. You possess the neural key, Aera said, her voice filled with a mix of fear and respect. They actually gave you the alpha command codes. Marcus rubbed his bruised throat, coughing. He looked at his hands. The nanoswarm under his skin pulsed with a soft blue light. He wasn't just a handler. The council had given him absolute dominion over them. What? I don't want to hurt you, Marcus wheezed, standing up. But don't touch me like that again. Nyx straightened up, shaking off the pain. She looked at him differently now, not as prey but as a puzzle. Understood, she said, her tone icy but compliant. You are stronger than you look, handler. The atmosphere shifted. The immediate threat of death had lowered slightly, replaced by a tense truce. Marcus went to the kitchen unit and tapped the synthesizer. Computer, 2 synthetic plasma rations. High grade. The machine whirred and dispensed 2 pouches of red liquid. He tossed them to the women. They caught them midair, tearing them open with their teeth and draining them in seconds. It was savage and mesmerizing. So, Marcus said, leaning against the counter, trying to stop his hands from shaking. You said you were reclaimed from the War of Ashes. That was 50 years ago. You've been in stasis? Since the fall of our homeworld, Aera answered, wiping a drop of red fluid from her lip. The Dominion froze us. They woke us up only for testing. Combat simulations. Torture. Until today. She looked at Marcus with piercing intensity. Why you? You are not military. You are not rich. You are a mechanic. Marcus shook his head. I don't know. Maybe that's the point. I'm nobody. Who looks at a nobody? Just then, a loud chime echoed through the apartment. The door control panel flashed red. Security alert. Marcus frowned. He hadn't even been here an hour. He walked to the panel and activated the video feed. Outside his door stood 3 men. They weren't Dominion guards. They wore ragged combat gear, covered in tech scraps and cybernetic implants. Scavengers. Or worse, organ hunters. Open up. One of them shouted, pounding on the metal. We know they're in there. The shipment manifest leaked. Hand over the exotics and we might let you live. Marcus's blood ran cold. The council hadn't just given him a gift, they had put a target on his back. The leak was intentional. This was a test. They wanted to see if he could keep them. Or maybe they wanted to see if the Vrukai would protect him. Friends of yours? Nyx asked, stepping up behind him. She didn't look scared. She looked hungry. No, Marcus said. Hunters. They want you. Aera laughed, a sound like grinding glass. Her wings expanded fully, casting a shadow over the entire hallway. Let them in, she whispered, her eyes glowing brighter. I'm still hungry. Marcus looked at the screen, then at the 2 lethal creatures waiting for his command. He realized then that his life as a mechanic was over. He was now the warden of monsters. He took a deep breath and hit the door release. The heavy metal door slid open. The 3 hunters stormed in, weapons raised. Hands in the air, you. The leader stopped mid-sentence. He saw Marcus standing calmly in the center of the room. And then he saw what was rising from the shadows on either side of him. Nyx and Aera shrieked, a sonic blast that shattered the windows and brought the hunters to their knees, clutching their bleeding ears. Before the men could recover, the Vrukai launched themselves. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. Marcus turned away as the first hunter screamed, the sound cut short by the wet tear of flesh. He walked to the broken window and looked out at the city. The wind whipped his face, carrying the smell of rain and the iron tang of blood from the room behind him. He looked at his hand, the blue light of the neural key fading. This was his birthday present. Power, violence, and 2 beautiful nightmares that belonged to him. But as the screams died down and the only sound left was the heavy breathing of the Vrukai, Marcus noticed something on the street below. A black hovercar was parked, watching his building. The window tinted down just an inch, and Marcus saw the insignia of the High Council. They were watching. This wasn't just a test. It was a reality show and he was the main character. Nyx appeared at his side, wiping blood from her cheek. She followed his gaze to the car below. They are watching us, she said. Yes, Marcus replied. They want to see what we do. He turned to look at her. Her face was savage, but her eyes held a spark of intelligence, a spark of rebellion. We play their game, Marcus said, his voice hardening. For now. But if we're going to survive, we need to know what we're really dealing with. What is inside those cubes besides command codes? Aera joined them, dragging the limp body of the leader out of the living room. Coordinates, she said, tossing a bloody data chip onto the table. He had this on him. It's a bounty. But not from the scavengers. It's from a rival corporation. Marcus picked up the chip. It projected a map. A map to a facility deep in the dead zone, the irradiated wasteland outside the city walls. Why would a corporation want you? Marcus asked. Nyx smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. Because, Handler, we are not just warriors. We are keys. Our DNA contains the location of the Royal Armory. The weapon stockpile that could overthrow the Dominion. Marcus froze. He looked at the 2 women. They weren't just assassins. They were living treasure maps to the most dangerous weapons in the galaxy. And the Council had given them to a mechanic in Sector 4 to hide them in plain sight. He closed his fist around the chip. They think I'm a hiding spot, Marcus realized. A scapegoat. He looked at Nyx and Aera. They think I'm weak. He walked over to his tool bag, the one thing he had brought from his old life. He pulled out a heavy plasma wrench. They're wrong. The night had just begun. Marcus had to clean up 3 bodies, fix a broken window, and figure out how to hide 2 winged aliens in an apartment building with thin walls. But for the first time in 30 years he didn't feel helpless. He felt alive. He looked at the Vrukai. Get cleaned up, he ordered. We have work to do. As they moved to obey, Marcus stared at the happy birthday hologram that was still glitching in the corner of his vision from the nanoimplant. It was definitely a birthday he would never forget. He just hoped he'd live to see the next one. The smell of ozone and copper hung heavy in the apartment as Marcus worked. He wasn't a soldier and he wasn't a cleaner, but growing up in Sector 9 meant you learned how to make things disappear. He had dragged the bodies of the 3 hunters into the bathroom, piling them into the sonic shower unit. It wasn't a permanent solution, but the high-frequency vibrations would break down the organic matter enough to flush it into the waste reclamation pipes within a few hours. It was grim work, but his hands didn't shake. He was too focused on the problem at hand. Nyx and Aera watched him from the doorway. They had washed the blood off their skin, their pale forms glowing softly in the dim emergency lights. They looked almost angelic, if you ignored the lethal stillness with which they held themselves. "You are efficient," Nyx observed, her voice devoid of the mocking tone she had used earlier. "Most humans vomit when they see the inside of a body." Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, tossing it into the incinerator chute. "In the slums, if you don't clean up a mess, the sanitation droids fine you. If you can't pay, they take a limb. You learn to be tidy." He walked past them into the living room, stepping over the shattered glass. The wind from the broken window was getting colder. "We can't stay here. That hovercar outside. The council is watching, but they aren't interfering yet. They want to see if I can handle the hunters. If I fail, they'll just bomb the apartment and erase the mistake. We need to move before the next wave comes." Aera flexed her wings, the tips scraping the ceiling. "Well, where? And how do you propose we walk through the streets of Sector 4 unseen? We are not exactly inconspicuous." She gestured to her 10-foot wingspan and the crimson glow of her eyes. She was right. They were walking neon signs screaming danger. Marcus went to his bedroom and pulled out a heavy trunk from under the bed. It was his stash of scavenged parts, illegal tech he had refurbished to sell on the black market. He rummaged through it and pulled out 2 heavy oil-stained mechanics' trench coats. They were made of lead-lined synthetic leather, designed to protect workers from radiation leaks. "Put these on," he said, tossing them to the Vrukai. "The lead lining will dampen your thermal signature so drones won't pick you up immediately. As for the wings..." He paused, looking at the massive appendages. "Can you retract them? Or fold them tight?" Nyx nodded slowly. "It is painful to keep them bound for long, but we can compress the bone structure temporarily." She closed her eyes, and a sickening crunching sound echoed in the room as her wings folded in on themselves, wrapping tight against her spine like a second skin. Aera followed suit, wincing slightly. They pulled the heavy coats on. The coats were huge on a human, but on the Vrukai they fit like tailored combat gear, the high collars hiding their necks and the long sleeves covering their clawed hands. "The eyes," Marcus muttered, looking at their glowing irises. "I can't fix the eyes." He dug back into the trunk and found 2 pairs of welding goggles. "What are these?" "If anyone asks, you're industrial welders with optical sensitivity. Don't speak. Don't look at anyone. Just follow me." Nyx took the goggles, turning them over in her hands. "You order us around with such ease, handler. Are you not afraid that once we leave this room we might decide to fly away?" Marcus strapped his tool belt around his waist, sliding the plasma wrench into a holster like a gun. He looked her dead in the eye. "The neuro key is in my head, Nyx. If you fly away, I can detonate the nanoswarm in your blood. You know that. But I haven't done it. I haven't used the pain command once since you got here. I'm betting you'd rather follow a man who treats you like a partner than go back to the scientist who kept you in a cage." Silence stretched between them. For the first time, Nyx looked impressed. She slid the goggles on, masking her terrifying gaze. "Lead the way, handler." They left the apartment, taking the service stairs instead of the elevator to avoid the cameras. The stairwell was dark and smelled of rust. They descended 20 floors in silence, moving with a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Marcus took point, checking corners, while the 2 Vrukai covered his rear, their footsteps silent despite their size. When they reached the ground level, the noise of the city hit them. Sector 4 was a chaotic mix of neon advertisements, flying traffic and crowds of workers shuffling between shifts. The rain was falling harder now, sizzling as it hit the pavement. Marcus pulled his hood up. "Stay close," he whispered. They merged into the crowd. Marcus could feel the tension radiating off Aera. Every time a human brushed past her, he could sense her urge to snap their neck. The mental link between them was strong. He could feel her hunger, a dull ache in the back of his mind. Control it, he projected the thought towards her, testing the link. Aera twitched, surprised by his mental voice, but the aggression subsided. They navigated through the market district, heading towards the industrial zone. "Where are we going?" Nyx's voice echoed in his head, bypassing his ears entirely. "Telepathy. Of course. My workshop, Marcus thought back. It's off the grid. I have an old transport hauler there. If we're going to the dead zone to find that facility, we need something that can handle radiation and rough terrain. And I need to get weapons. Real ones. They turned into a narrow alleyway, away from the main street lights. The workshop was a converted hangar at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by piles of scrap metal. Marcus approached the heavy blast door and punched in a code. The door groaned and rolled up. Inside, the air smelled of grease and old metal. In the center of the bay sat the mule, an ugly six-wheeled armored transport that Marcus had been restoring for years. It wasn't pretty, but it was built like a tank. "This is our chariot?" Aera asked aloud, her voice dripping with skepticism as she pulled off her goggles. "It looks like garbage." Marcus walked over to a workbench and started pulling out crates. "It's a kinetic-shielded, all-terrain heavy hauler with a modified fusion core. It can drive through a wall and not feel it. And it's not connected to the Dominion network. They can't track it." He threw a heavy pulse rifle to Aera and a kinetic shotgun to Nyx. "Do you know how to use these?" Nyx caught the shotgun with one hand, checking the chamber with a fluid motion. "I have mastered every weapon system in the known galaxy, Marcus. This is a toy. But it will do." Marcus grabbed a modified pistol for himself and started loading supplies into the mule. "We leave in 10 minutes. We need to hit the dead zone border before the morning patrol shift changes." Suddenly, the lights in the workshop flickered and died. The only illumination came from the red emergency LEDs and the glowing eyes of the Vrukai. The sound of the rain outside stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. "We are not alone," Aera hissed, spinning around, her weapon raised towards the open hangar door. From the darkness of the alley, a single figure stepped into the red light. It wasn't a scavenger. It was a cyborg, a terrifying fusion of flesh and chrome, standing 7 feet tall. One of his arms was a rotating Gatling cannon, and half his face was a steel plate with a glowing blue optic sensor. On his chest, the logo of the Iron Syndicate was welded into the metal. A bounty hunter. But not a cheap one. This was a Class A exterminator. "Citizen 749 Marcus." The cyborg's voice was a grinding mechanical bass. "You are in possession of stolen corporate property. Hand over the specimens. You have 10 seconds to comply." Marcus ducked behind the mule's reinforced tire. "Specimens?" He yelled back. "They have names." The cyborg didn't waste time. His arm cannon spun up with a high-pitched whine. "Brrr." A stream of tracer rounds tore through the workshop, chewing up the concrete floor and sparking off the mule's armor. "Scatter." Marcus screamed. Nyx and Aera moved faster than the eye could follow. Nyx leaped straight up into the rafters of the hangar, her trench coat flaring like a cape. Aera dashed to the right, using the scrap piles as cover. The cyborg tracked Aera, his cannon tearing through a stack of old engine parts. He was suppressing them, keeping them pinned. He knew what they were. He wasn't letting them get close. "Marcus." Nyx's voice screamed in his mind. "Distract him. I need an opening." Marcus gritted his teeth. This was insane. He was a mechanic, not a hero. But he grabbed a canister of volatile welding fuel from the back of the truck. Tin Man." Marcus shouted, stepping out from behind the tire. The cyborg's blue optics snapped towards him. The cannon swiveled. Marcus hurled the canister with all his strength towards the cyborg and simultaneously fired his pistol. He wasn't a great shot, but at this range he didn't miss. The bullet hit the canister mid-air, just feet from the cyborg. Boom. An explosion of blue fire engulfed the entrance. The shockwave knocked Marcus off his feet, slamming him back against the truck. The cyborg staggered, his shields flaring gold as they absorbed the blast, but he was blinded by the smoke and fire. "Now." Marcus projected the command with every ounce of his will. From the rafters, Nyx dropped like a guillotine. She didn't use the shotgun. She used gravity. She landed squarely on the cyborg's shoulders, her clawed hands driving into the gaps in his neck armor. Metal shrieked as she tore at his hydraulics. The cyborg thrashed, reaching up to grab her, but Aera was already there. She burst through the smoke, sliding on her knees, and unloaded the pulse rifle point blank into the cyborg's knee joint. The leg exploded in a shower of sparks and oil. The giant machine man toppled over, crashing to the ground with the weight of a small car. Nyx backflipped off him, landing gracefully next to Marcus. The cyborg wasn't dead, his upper body was crawling forward, the Gatling gun trying to realign. Marcus walked up to him, the heat of the fire warming his face. He aimed his pistol at the cyborg's organic eye, the only human part left. "Who sent you?" Marcus demanded. The cyborg coughed, a sound like gears grinding. "The Syndicate. The Dominion. Everyone wants the keys. Cannot run. Marcus pulled the trigger. The cyborg went still. The silence returned to the workshop, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. Marcus lowered his gun, his hands trembling uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was fading. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Nyx. Her touch was still cold, but it was steadying. Good shot, handler, she said softly. Aera kicked the metal carcass of the cyborg. He transmitted our location before he died. More will come. Heavier units. Marcus nodded, holstering his gun. He looked at the mule, then at his two dangerous companions. He realized that the happy birthday hologram was finally gone from his vision. The party was over. The war had started. Get in the truck, Marcus ordered, climbing into the driver's seat. Aera, you're on the turret. Nyx, navigate. We're going to the dead zone. The engine of the mule roared to life, a deep, angry growl that shook the walls. As they tore out of the hangar, crushing the remains of the cyborg under their massive wheels, Marcus looked at the city skyline one last time. He was leaving his home, his life, and his identity behind. But as he gripped the steering wheel, with two apex predators guarding his flanks, he realized something strange. He wasn't running away out of fear. He was driving towards the truth. And God help anyone who stood in their way. The mule roared down the desolate highway of the outer rim, its 6 massive wheels chewing up the cracked asphalt. The neon glow of the city center was far behind them now, replaced by the flickering amber streetlights of the industrial slums. Here, the buildings were skeletal husks, abandoned decades ago when the atmospheric scrubbers failed in this sector. Inside the cab, the noise of the engine was a constant, deafening drone, but it was the only thing keeping the silence from suffocating them. Marcus gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. Next to him, Nyx watched the passing ruins with a detached curiosity, her welding goggles resting on her forehead, revealing her crimson eyes. Aera was in the rear gunner seat, her legs dangling into the cabin, cleaning her pulse rifle with a rag she had found. We are approaching the perimeter wall, Marcus shouted over the engine noise. It's the only thing separating the Dominion from the dead zone. It's automated. Turrets, sensor grids, kill zones. If we don't time this right, we're ash. Nyx looked at the massive concrete barrier looming in the distance. It stretched up into the smog-filled clouds, a seamless monolith of gray steel and concrete, topped with blinding searchlights. Can this machine take a direct hit from a plasma cannon? She asked calmly. Once, Marcus replied grimly. Maybe twice if we're lucky. But we're not going to get hit. I have a frequency jammer. It should ghost us to the sensors for about 30 seconds. That's all the time we have to hit the old drainage tunnel at Sector 4B. 30 seconds, Aera mused from the back. I have killed armies in less time. Marcus glanced at the dashboard. A radar blip appeared. Here we go. Jammer active, now. He flipped a rusted toggle switch. The cabin lights dimmed as the mule diverted power to the electronic warfare suite. Outside, the massive searchlights of the wall swept over the highway. As the beam hit the truck, Marcus held his breath. For a second, nothing happened. Then the light moved on. The jammer was working. Hold on. Marcus yelled, jerking the wheel hard to the right. The mule smashed through a rusted chain-link fence and careened off-road, bouncing violently over piles of rubble and trash. Ahead, a dark maw opened in the base of the wall, the drainage tunnel. It was barred by a heavy iron gate. Ram it! Aera shouted, her excitement spiking through the mental link. Marcus floored the accelerator. The fusion core whined, pushing the heavy vehicle to its limit. Crash! The sound was deafening as the mule's reinforced bumper slammed into the iron gate. Metal screamed and twisted, sparks showering the windshield. The gate buckled, then tore free from its hinges, flying into the darkness of the tunnel. They were in. The tunnel was pitch black, the headlights cutting through the thick, stagnant water that pooled on the floor. The smell was atrocious, chemical waste and rot. We are through, Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. But just as he relaxed, the dashboard lit up red. Warning, lock undetected. They found us, Marcus screamed. The jammer had burned out. Behind them, at the tunnel entrance, a perimeter defense turret swiveled down. A beam of concentrated green energy sizzled through the air, scorching the metal roof of the mule. Return fire. Marcus yelled, swerving the truck to avoid the debris falling from the tunnel ceiling. With pleasure. Aera's voice was a growl. The turret controls in the cab spun as she manually aimed the roof-mounted cannon. Thump thump thump. The mule's heavy kinetic rounds illuminated the tunnel like strobe lights. The shots connected, blowing the defense turret into shrapnel. They burst out the other side of the tunnel and into the open air. Marcus slammed the brakes, the mule skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust. Silence fell. But it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of death. They were in the dead zone. The sky here wasn't black or blue. It was a bruised purple, scarred by constant ion storms. The ground was a vast, gray desert of ash and glass, dotted with the skeletons of ancient skyscrapers that had fallen during the war. The air outside the truck was toxic, shimmering with radiation. "Welcome to hell," Marcus whispered. He checked the atmospheric sensors. "Suit seals check. Do not open the doors unless I say so. The radiation out there will melt your skin in minutes without the meds." Nyx leaned forward, pressing her hand against the reinforced glass. Her eyes scanned the horizon, zooming in with a biological precision no human could match. "It is quiet," she said. "But not empty. I can hear hearts beating beneath the sand." Marcus looked at her. "Mutants. Scavengers who didn't make it back. Things that evolved in the radiation. We need to keep moving." The coordinates from the chip point to a bunker about 50 miles north, near the old crater of silence. He put the truck back in gear, driving slower now, navigating the treacherous terrain. Hours passed. The landscape was monotonous and terrifying. Giant ribs of some bioengineered leviathan from the war jutted out of the sand like monuments. As they drove, the tension in the cab shifted from immediate survival to curiosity. "You fought in the war," Marcus broke the silence. "On the side of the invaders. Why did you lose?" It was a bold question. Aera dropped down from the gunner's seat, sitting on a crate behind Marcus. She looked tired, her wings shifting uncomfortably under the heavy coat. "We didn't lose," Aera said, her voice bitter. "We were betrayed. The royal house, our leaders, they made a deal with your Dominion. They sold us out to keep their power. We were the soldiers on the front lines. When the order came to surrender, we refused. So they gassed us, put us in stasis. And now, we are birthday presents." Nyx turned to Marcus. "That is why we are valuable, handler. The royal armory contains the fleet that refused the surrender. Thousands of ships, sleeping in the dark, waiting for the genetic key to wake them up." She tapped her chest. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. The weight of the situation was crushing. He wasn't just hiding two women, he was hiding the trigger for a second galactic war. "If the Dominion gets that fleet," Marcus said, "they'll wipe out the resistance in the Outer Rim. They'll enslave everyone, humans and aliens alike." Nyx nodded. "Yes. And if the rebellion gets it, chaos. And what if we get it?" Marcus asked. The question hung in the air. Nyx and Aera exchanged a look. Aera smiled, her fangs glinting. "Then, little mechanic, you become the king of the ashes." Suddenly, the mule lurched violently to the side. The engine sputtered and died. Marcus tried to restart it, but the controls were dead. "Impy," he realized. "Something hit us with an electromagnetic pulse." The truck ground to a halt in the middle of a valley of jagged rocks. The lights in the cabin went out, leaving them in total darkness. "They found us already?" Aera hissed, reaching for her rifle. "No," Marcus whispered, looking at the sensor readings on his wrist comp, which was shielded. "This isn't a directional attack. It's environmental. Or biological." Outside, the sand began to shift. Not from wind, but from below. A low, vibrating hum resonated through the hull of the truck. "Something is coming," Nyx said, her voice tight. "Something big." She closed her eyes, using her sonar sense. Her eyes snapped open wide. Above us. Crunch. The roof of the mule buckled inward. Enormous claws, like scythes made of rusted metal, tore through the armored plating like it was paper. A creature shrieked, a sound that was half scream, half static. It was a dust stalker, a mutated arachnid the size of a dropship, with chitinous armor that blended perfectly with the gray sand. Its multiple eyes glowed sickly yellow as it peered into the hole it had made in the roof. Mandibles dripped acidic saliva onto the seat between Marcus and Nyx. "Aera, the turret!" Marcus yelled, scrambling back as acid sizzled on the dashboard. "It's manual override only." Aera didn't need telling twice. She leaped, grabbing the edges of the torn metal roof, and hauled herself up outside the truck, right into the face of the monster. The radiation alarms on Marcus's wrist screamed, but Aera didn't care. She was a Vrukai. She roared, a challenge that matched the stalker's scream, and jammed the barrel of her pulse rifle into the creature's open mouth. Boom boom boom. Muffled explosions lit up the creature's head from the inside. The stalker thrashed, flinging Aera off the roof. She landed hard on the sand, rolling to her feet instantly. The creature, now half blind and enraged, turned its attention to the small figure on the sand. It raised a massive leg to crush her. "Nyx!" Marcus shouted. Nyx was already moving. She kicked the passenger door open, shattering the lock, and sprinted out. She didn't have a gun. She didn't need one. As the stalker's leg came down, Nyx caught it. With a grunt of exertion that shook the ground, she caught the multi-ton limb. Her feet sank into the glass sand, her muscles bulging under the trench coat. "Now, Marcus," she screamed mentally. Marcus grabbed the kinetic shotgun from the rack. He jumped out of the truck. The radiation burned his skin instantly, feeling like a sunburn multiplied by 10. He ignored it. He ran towards the beast, sliding under its belly. He aimed the shotgun at the soft, glowing sac beneath its thorax, the fuel gland. "Eat this, you ugly bastard." He pulled the trigger. The kinetic slug pierced the gland. Blue ichor exploded outward. The creature shrieked one last time as its internal chemistry destabilized. It collapsed, legs folding underneath it. Marcus scrambled out from under the falling carcass, coughing in the toxic dust. Nyx and Aera stood over him, their coats tattered, breathing heavy in the poisoned air. The stalker lay dead, a mountain of twitching flesh. "We need to get back inside," Marcus wheezed, his vision blurring from the radiation exposure. "The meds?" He stumbled. Aera caught him before he hit the ground. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. She effortlessly lifted him and carried him back into the broken cabin of the mule. Nyx followed, dragging a piece of the stalker's shell. "We can use this to patch the roof," she said pragmatically. Inside, Aera injected Marcus with a stim shot. He gasped, the burning sensation fading to a dull throb. "You are fragile," Aera said, looking at him with a strange expression. "Why did you come out? We could have handled it." Marcus sat up, wiping ash from his face. "We're a team," he said, his voice raspy. "I don't let my crew fight alone." Nyx looked at him, then at the dead monster outside. "You are a strange human, Marcus. Most would have stayed in the armored box." She began welding the piece of shell over the hole in the roof using a portable laser torch. "The EMP fried the ignition coil," Marcus said, checking the dash. "But I can bypass it. We can be moving in 20 minutes. "Wait," Nyx said, freezing. She turned her head to the north, towards the deep desert. "Do you hear that?" Marcus strained his ears. He heard nothing but the wind. "Hear what?" "A signal," Nyx whispered. "It is faint. Ancient. It is broadcasting on a Vrukai frequency." She looked at Aera, her eyes wide with shock. "It is a distress call. From a sister." Aera stiffened. "Impossible. All the others are in stasis." "No," Nyx said, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and horror. "This signal, it is not coming from a stasis pod. It is coming from a cage. Someone else is out there. And they are being hunted." Marcus looked at the map. The signal was coming from the same direction as the coordinates. "Looks like we're not just going for a weapon stash anymore," Marcus said, revving the engine as the bypass wires sparked to life. "We're going on a rescue mission." The crater of silence lived up to its name. As the mule crested the final ridge of jagged obsidian rock, the howling wind that had plagued them for the last 50 miles suddenly vanished. Below them lay a bowl of dust so vast it looked like a wound in the planet's crust, spanning 20 miles across. In the center of the crater, rising from the gray mist like a tombstone, was the structure. It wasn't a bunker. It was an ancient atmospheric processing spire, a relic of the Golden Age, now rusted and twisted, leaning precariously to one side. Strange, pulsating cables ran from the ground into the spire, glowing with a sickly yellow light. "The signal is coming from inside that tower," Nyx whispered, her voice tight. "It is weak. She is fading." Marcus killed the engine to minimize their thermal signature. "That's not a Dominion facility," he noted, peering through his digital binoculars. "Look at the perimeter. Skulls on spikes. Scrap metal totems. That's scavenger territory. But not the ones we met in the city. These look like rust monks." Aera hissed, her fangs fully extended. "I smell her blood. It is stale. They have had her for a long time." Marcus put a hand on Aera's arm. "We don't go in screaming. If they're rust monks, they're tech worshippers. They replace their body parts with mining equipment. They're tough and they're crazy. If they hear us coming, they might kill her just to spite us." "We need a distraction," Nyx said, looking at Marcus. Marcus nodded. He pointed to a cluster of fuel silos on the eastern edge of the crater. "Those are volatile. If I can hack the pressure valves from here, I can make them blow. It'll draw their forces out. While they're fighting the fire, we slip in through the ventilation shafts." He pulled out a portable deck, connecting it to the mule's long-range transmitter. His fingers flew across the holographic keys. "It's encrypted, primitive but messy. Give me 30 seconds." Nyx and Aera waited, their bodies tense like coiled springs. The bond between the three of them was humming with anticipation. Marcus wasn't just their handler anymore. He was the architect of their vengeance. "Got it," Marcus muttered. He pressed the execute key. A mile away, the eastern silos groaned. Then a massive fireball erupted into the purple sky, silent at first, until the shockwave hit them seconds later. Boom. Alarms began to wail in the valley below. Tiny figures swarmed out of the spire like ants from a kicked hill, heading towards the fire. "Move," Marcus commanded. They descended into the crater on foot, moving through the shadows of the industrial wreckage. They reached the base of the spire undetected. Marcus found a maintenance hatch, fused shut with rust. Aera didn't wait for a tool. She jammed her claws into the steel and ripped the door off its hinges with a screech of tearing metal. They slipped inside. The interior was a nightmare of steam, dripping oil, and the smell of rotting meat. The walls were lined with cages, mostly empty, but some containing skeletal remains of what looked like other alien species. Up, Nyx signaled. "The distress call is coming from the upper processing deck." They climbed the rusted stairwells, passing rooms filled with horrific machinery. The rust monks didn't just scavenge tech, they merged with it. They passed a workshop where a torso, still alive, was being wired into a generator. Marcus swallowed the bile rising in his throat. This place wasn't a base, it was a slaughterhouse. As they reached the top floor, the air grew colder. In the center of the room, suspended by heavy chains and hooked up to a terrifying array of tubes and pumps, was the source of the signal. She was smaller than Nyx or Aera, her skin a deep, bruised indigo instead of pale white. Her wings were pinned painfully against the machinery, and clear tubes were running from her arms and neck, draining a glowing blue fluid, her blood, into canisters. She was barely conscious, her head hanging low, her long white hair matted with grime. Standing around her were 4 massive rust monks. They were more machine than man, their limbs replaced with pneumatic drills and saws. They were arguing over the canisters. "Vora," Nyx breathed, her voice breaking. The sound alerted the monks. They spun around, their optical sensors whirring. "Intruders." One of them buzzed, his voice synthesized and distorted. He raised a buzzsaw arm. "Fresh parts for the machine god." "Kill them," Marcus said cold and flat. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Nyx and Aera moved with the fury of demons let loose from hell. Nyx launched herself at the nearest monk, dodging his saw blade with a blur of speed. She grabbed his mechanical head and twisted. Sparks flew as she ripped the cybernetics clean off his shoulders. Aera was even more brutal. She tackled a monk, driving him into the floor. He tried to drill into her chest, but her skin was harder than his drill bit. She tore his mechanical arm off and beat him to death with it. Marcus stayed back, providing cover fire. A third monk tried to flank them, aiming a rivet gun at Nyx's exposed back. Marcus tracked him, steadied his aim, and fired 2 rounds into the monk's organic knee. The cyborg collapsed, and Aera finished him off with a stomp that cracked the floor plates. The last monk, seeing his brothers dismantled in seconds, tried to run for an alarm panel. Marcus shot the panel, shattering it. The monk turned, backed against the wall as Nyx advanced on him. She didn't kill him immediately. She lifted him by his throat. "How long?" she hissed. "How long have you been draining her?" The monk gargled oil and blood. "Years, her blood, it powers the whole facility, endless energy." Nyx threw him through the glass window, watching him fall into the abyss of the crater below. They rushed to the suspended figure. "Vora," Aera said gently, ripping the tubes out of her arm. Blue blood sprayed, sizzling on the floor. Vora groaned, her eyes fluttering open. They were a pale milky white, blind. "Sister?" she rasped, her voice weak. "Is that Nyx? Am I dead?" Nyx supported her weight as the chains were cut. "No, Vora. You are free. We are here." Marcus stepped forward with a medkit. "She's in hypovolemic shock. She's lost too much fluid. We need to get her to the mule now. I have synthetic plasma there." Vora turned her head towards Marcus, sniffing the air. "A human?" She recoiled slightly, fear etching her face. "He is with us," Aera said firmly. "He is the handler. He is different." Suddenly the entire spire shook violently. The lights flickered red. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," a computerized voice announced. "The monk I threw," Nyx realized. "He must have triggered a dead man switch." Marcus looked at the countdown on a wall monitor. 2 minutes. "We can't go back down the stairs," Marcus yelled. "We'll never make it." "Then we fly," Nyx said, looking at the shattered window. Marcus looked at the drop. It was 1,000 feet down to the jagged rocks. "I can't fly," he shouted. "And Vora is too weak to carry anyone." Nyx looked at Aera. Aera, you take Vora. I will take the human. Aera nodded, scooping up the frail Vrukai in her arms. She sprinted at the window and dove out, her wings snapping open with a thunderous crack as she caught the updraft. Nyx turned to Marcus. Do you trust me, handler? Marcus looked at the exploding facility behind them, then at the vampire woman. I don't have a choice, do I? He wrapped his arms around her waist. Hold tight, she commanded. She ran and leaped into the void. The feeling of falling was terrifying. The wind roared in Marcus's ears, tearing at his clothes. For a second he thought they were going to smash into the ground. Then Nyx's wings unfurled, massive leathery sails that blocked out the sky. The jolt nearly dislocated his shoulders, but she held him tight. They swooped up, banking hard away from the spire just as the top levels exploded. A shockwave of heat and debris chased them, but they were faster. They glided through the smoke, soaring over the crater like dragons of legend. Marcus looked down. He was flying. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and impossible. He looked up at Nyx's face. She was focused, her eyes scanning for the mule, but there was a faint smile on her lips. For the first time she looked truly free. They landed heavily near the truck, kicking up a cloud of ash. Marcus stumbled away, his legs turning to jelly, gasping for air. Aera landed softly beside them, laying Vora on the flatbed of the truck. Marcus scrambled to get the plasma rations. He fed them to Vora, watching as the color slowly returned to her skin. Her wounds began to knit together before his eyes. After a few minutes she sat up, weak but alive. She looked at Marcus with her blind eyes. You saved me, she whispered. A human saved a Vrukai. The prophecy was wrong. Prophecy? Marcus asked, wiping grease from his forehead. Vora coughed, clutching Nyx's hand. The monks, they didn't just drain me. They made me interface with their databanks. They were trying to decrypt the transmission they intercepted. From the Dominion High Council. She paused, her expression darkening. The Dominion knows about the Royal Armory. But they don't know where it is. That is why they gave you Nyx and Aera. You are not just a hiding spot, Marcus. You are bait. We figured that out, Marcus said. They want me to lead them to the ships. No, Vora shook her head. It is worse. The armory is not just ships. It is a living biological fortress. It requires a prime key to open. A genetic sequence that no single Vrukai possesses. She pointed to Nyx, then Aera, then herself. It is split. Between the three of the royal line. Together we are the key. Marcus realized the implication immediately. That's why the distress signal was so strong. The monks were trying to lure the others here to complete the set. Yes, Vora said. But there is something else. The Dominion has dispatched the Eclipse Protocol. They are not sending soldiers anymore. They have released the hunter-killer droids. They are atmospheric drones that track Vrukai pheromones. They are already en route. If we stay here, we die. Marcus looked at the sky. The purple clouds were swirling ominously. He could hear a distant, low-frequency thrumming, like 1,000 beating wings. Into the truck. Marcus yelled. We need to get underground. The bunker coordinates, how far? 10 miles, Nyx said, helping Vora into the cab. But the terrain is impassable for wheels. Then we make a path, Marcus growled, jumping into the driver's seat. Because if those droids catch us, they won't just kill you. They'll take you apart to build their key. As the mule roared to life, tearing away from the burning spire, Marcus looked in the rearview mirror. The horizon was darkening. A swarm was coming. A swarm of steel locusts hungry for royal blood. And all he had was a mechanic's truck, a shotgun, and 3 weakened vampires. Happy birthday to me, Marcus muttered and punched the accelerator. The rearview monitors of the mule were washed out with static, but Marcus didn't need them to know death was coming. He could hear it. A low, buzzing drone that vibrated the fillings in his teeth, growing louder by the second. The hunter-killer droids, the Eclipse Protocol, were a cloud of black steel blocking out the purple sky. They are gaining, Aera announced from the turret seat, her voice calm but tight. She spun the cannon, tracking the lead elements of the swarm. Range, 2 miles. Time to intercept, 90 seconds. Marcus gripped the steering yoke, his knuckles white. The mule was pushing 80 miles per hour over terrain that would have broken a tank, bouncing violently over jagged rocks and solidified lava flows. Vora. Marcus shouted over the roar of the engine. Can you jam them? Vora sat in the passenger seat, her blind eyes moving rapidly as if reading invisible text. Her hands were pressed against the dashboard, interfacing directly with the mule's computer core. Their encryption is military grade, she said, sweat beading on her indigo forehead. I cannot stop them. But I can confuse their targeting sensors. I can make the truck look like a rock, then a heat flare, then a hole in the ground. It will buy us time. Suddenly the sky lit up. A beam of plasma struck the ground just feet from the mule's rear tires, turning the sand into glass. They are firing. Nyx yelled. Evasive maneuvers. Marcus slammed the brakes and cranked the wheel hard left. The massive six-wheeled hauler drifted sideways, spraying gravel, just as a barrage of laser fire decimated the path they had been on a second ago. He stomped on the accelerator again, correcting the slide. Hold on, he screamed. Ahead of them, the flat wasteland ended abruptly. A massive fissure, a canyon carved by tectonic shifts, cut across their path. It was 50 feet wide. The bridge is gone, Marcus yelled. There's no way across. Do not stop, Nyx commanded, leaning forward. The fusion core has an overload capacitor. Use it. Marcus looked at the gap, then at the swarm closing in behind them. If he stopped, they were dead. If he missed the jump, they were dead. All right, he gritted out. Physics be damned. He flipped the safety cover on the engine override switch. Warning, core temp critical. He didn't care. He floored it. The mule surged forward, the engine screaming like a dying beast. They hit the ramp of broken concrete at the edge of the canyon at 90 miles an hour. For a terrifying second, they were weightless. The nose of the truck tilted down. Below them, the abyss was dark and bottomless. Come on, Marcus whispered. The rear wheels caught the edge of the other side with a bone-jarring crunch. The suspension groaned, metal shearing, but the tires dug in. The truck bounced, skidded, and slammed into a rock wall, finally coming to a halt. Steam hissed from the hood. They had made it. Behind them, the first wave of droids didn't stop. They dove into the canyon, crashing into the walls or plummeting into the dark, unable to mimic the jump. But the swarm was vast. The second wave simply flew over the gap. We are close, Vora gasped, unbuckling her harness. The resonance, it is calling to me. The armory, it is right there. She pointed to a massive, smooth cliff face embedded in the mountain ahead. It didn't look like a door. It looked like a seamless wall of obsidian, hundreds of feet high, etched with faint, glowing geometrical lines. We need to get out, Marcus said, grabbing his shotgun. The truck is done. The axle is snapped. They bailed out of the smoking vehicle. The air here was electric, charging the hair on their arms. The swarm was crossing the canyon now, a black tide descending on them. Go. Marcus yelled, racking the slide of his shotgun. Get to the wall. I'll hold them back. Aera looked at him. You cannot hold back a legion, human. Marcus smiled grimly. I can make them choke on it. Go. Unlock the door. Nyx and Aera grabbed Vora and sprinted towards the obsidian wall. Marcus took cover behind the wreckage of the mule. He checked his ammo. 6 kinetic slugs. 2 plasma grenades. And a prayer. The first droid swooped down, a sleek, metallic predator shaped like a hawk with razor wings and a red eye. Marcus blasted it out of the sky. BLM. It shattered into scrap. 1 down, he muttered. 10,000 to go. At the wall, the 3 sisters stood before the ancient surface. How does it work? Nyx demanded, her hands sliding over the cold stone. We must synchronize, Vora said, placing her hand on a central glyph that pulsed with a faint rhythm. Place your hands. Focus on the bloodline. Focus on the betrayal. Focus on the rage. Nyx and Aera placed their hands on the stone. The glyphs flared to life, shifting from dim white to a violent crimson. Back at the truck, Marcus was pinned down. Lasers were chewing up his cover. A grenade landed near him. He kicked it away just as it detonated, the shockwave throwing him back against the burning tire. His ears rang. Blood trickled down his nose. A droid landed on the hood of the truck, screeching. Marcus pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The droid lunged. Suddenly, a blur of motion intercepted it. Nyx was there. She didn't use a weapon. She tore the droid in half with her bare hands, blue hydraulic fluid splashing over her face. I told you, she hissed, looking at Marcus. We do not leave our handler. The door. Marcus yelled, pointing. The obsidian wall was groaning. The lines of light were splitting open. The rock wasn't moving, it was dissolving, turning into mist. A passage was opening. Aera and Vora were straining, their energy pouring into the lock. It is open. Vora screamed. Hurry. Nyx grabbed Marcus by the collar of his jacket and dragged him towards the opening. They dove through the mist just as the entire cliff face behind them was bombarded by the swarm's heavy plasma cannons. The explosion was deafening, but the mist acted like a shield, absorbing the energy. As soon as they were inside, the wall reformed instantly, solidifying back into impenetrable rock. The noise of the war outside cut off. Silence returned. Absolute heavy silence. They lay on the floor for a moment, catching their breath. The air inside was cool and sterile, smelling of ozone and preservation fluids. Marcus sat up, clicking a fresh magazine into his shotgun. "Did we make it?" he asked. Vora stood up, her blindness no longer seeming to hinder her. She walked forward, her arms outstretched. "Look," she whispered. Marcus stood and turned. His jaw dropped. They were standing on a high platform overlooking a cavern so massive it could have swallowed a city. And filling the cavern row upon row, stacked in launch cradles that stretched for miles, were the ships. They weren't like the bulky, utilitarian destroyers of the Dominion. These were works of art, sleek, organic curves, black hulls that seemed to absorb the light, pulsating with purple energy veins. There were thousands of them. Fighters, bombers, dreadnoughts. "The Dark Fleet," Aera said, her voice trembling with reverence. "It's real. The legends were true." "It's an army," Marcus said, stepping to the railing. "Enough to burn the Dominion to the ground." "And it is ours," Nyx said, a dangerous light in her eyes. She walked towards a central console that stood alone on the platform. It was a pillar of crystal, glowing with data streams. "We just need to initialize the wake-up sequence." Vora hesitated. She stood back, her head tilted. "Something is wrong," she murmured. The silence, it is too deep. There are no maintenance droids. No sentinels. Why was it so easy to enter once we had the keys? Nyx reached for the console. "Paranoia, sister. The Dominion locked us away because they feared this. Now we take it back." She placed her hand on the crystal interface. "Access denied." The voice didn't come from the console. It came from everywhere. It was a booming, omnipresent voice that resonated in their chests. The lights in the cavern shifted from purple to an angry red. Unauthorized biometric signature detected. Pure bloodline confirmed. Genetic authority, invalid. Nyx pulled her hand back as if burned. "What? Invalid? We are the royal line. We are the heirs." The voice boomed again. "Royal line compromised. Subjects have been in stasis. Subjects have been altered. Command protocol requires an uncorrupted handler." Marcus froze. The words hung in the air. He looked at the three powerful, terrifying vampire women, and then he looked at the console. "Uncorrupted handler," he repeated. "It doesn't mean royalty. It means someone who hasn't been asleep. Someone currently active in the Galactic Registry." Aera turned to Marcus, her eyes wide. "The nanolink," she realized. "The Dominion put the handler codes in you. They didn't just give you control over us. They gave you the interface for this." "They didn't know," Marcus whispered, the realization hitting him like a truck. "The Council didn't know the armory needed a handler. They thought the link was just a leash for you. But it's a key for the fleet." Nyx looked at Marcus. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. A moment ago they were allies. Now Marcus held the literal keys to the kingdom. If he activated the fleet, he would be the commander. Not them. "Marcus," Nyx said slowly, stepping closer. "Touch the console. Transfer the command to us." Marcus looked at the console, then at the fleet, then at the women. If he gave them the fleet, they would destroy the Dominion. But what would they do afterwards? They were apex predators who viewed humans as food or slaves. Would they stop at the Dominion? Or would they burn the whole galaxy? The voice said uncorrupted. Marcus said, backing up slightly. "If I transfer command to compromised subjects, the system might lock down permanently. Or self-destruct." "He is lying," Aera hissed, her claws extending. "He wants the power for himself." "No." Vora stepped between them. "Listen to the hum, sisters. The facility is waking up. It is bonding to him. Look at his hands." Marcus looked down. The blue veins of the nanolink were glowing bright, pulsing in time with the lights of the dreadnoughts below. He could feel the ships in his mind. Thousands of them. Waiting for orders. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was an admiral of a dead civilization. "We have a problem," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The Dominion knows we're here. They couldn't get in, but they can bury us. We need to launch. Now, who commands?" Nyx asked, her voice low and dangerous. She was inches from his face. "Do we serve you, human? Is that how this story ends? With us as slaves again?" Marcus looked her in the eye. He didn't blink. "No slaves," he said firmly. "Partners. I fly the ships. You pick the targets. We burn the Dominion together. But the leash stays in my hand until the war is over. Do we have a deal?" The cavern trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. The hunter-killer droids outside were bombing the mountain. They didn't have time to argue. Nyx stared at him for a long, agonizing second. Then she retracted her claws. She knelt on one knee. It was a gesture of submission, but her eyes burned with defiance. Fly the ships, handler. But know this, if you betray us, I will tear the key out of your skull myself. Marcus turned to the console. He placed his hand on the crystal. Identity confirmed. Welcome, Commander Marcus. Fleet systems online. Awaiting orders. Open the silo doors, Marcus commanded. All ships, wake up. The floor beneath them split open. The mountain above them groaned and began to slide apart. Sunlight, real, unfiltered sunlight, poured into the cavern as the camouflage shielding retracted. The dark fleet began to rise, their engines humming with a sound that shook the planet's core. Marcus watched the screen. Set course for Sector 1, he said. We're going to pay the High Council a visit. The sky over Sector 1, the gleaming capital of the Galactic Dominion, was usually a pristine, artificial blue. Today it was torn open by jagged streaks of violet lightning. The planetary defense grid screeched warnings as slipspace ruptures blossomed directly in the upper atmosphere. Not 1, not 10, but 3,000 ancient warships materialized instantly. They were black as oil, their hulls rippling like living muscle, casting a shadow that swallowed the entire government district. On the bridge of the flagship, the Obsidian King, Marcus stood watching the panic on the tactical holodeck. He wasn't wearing his mechanic's jumpsuit anymore. He was clad in the bioarmor of a fleet commander, a suit the ship had synthesized for him, sleek and terrifying. Hail from the High Council, Vora announced. She was plugged into the ship's neural network, her blind eyes seeing everything the fleet saw. They are demanding our surrender. They say we are violating a dozen galactic treaties. Marcus laughed, a cold, hard sound. Put them on screen. A massive holographic face appeared, High Counselor Valeri. He looked pale, sweating in his pristine white robes. Citizen 749. Valeri barked, trying to maintain authority. You are in command of stolen property. Power down those vessels immediately, or we will detonate your neural link. We own you. Marcus stepped closer to the screen. You don't own anything anymore, Valeri. And as for the link, he looked at Nyx. Nyx smiled, holding up a small, crushed device she had surgically removed from the back of Marcus's neck minutes before the jump. We fixed that glitch, Marcus said. This isn't a negotiation. This is an eviction notice. You have 5 minutes to evacuate the civilians. After that, the spire comes down. He cut the feed. Nyx, Aera, Marcus turned to the two warriors standing by the airlock. Take the drop pods. Secure the council chamber. I want them alive. They need to answer for what they did to your people. With pleasure, Aera purred, her wings twitching. Drop in 5 seconds. The Obsidian King shuddered as 2 boarding pods shot out from its belly, streaking towards the massive central tower of the city like meteors. The Dominion fleet finally reacted. Swarms of interceptors rose from the surface, firing green plasma. Shields up, Marcus ordered. Engage point defense. Do not fire on the city blocks. Target military assets only. The Dark Fleet unleashed hell. Beams of purple energy lashed out, slicing through the Dominion ships with terrifying ease. It wasn't a battle, it was a swatting of flies. The ancient tech was light years ahead of the modern military. Down on the surface, the drop pods smashed through the glass roof of the Grand Spire's atrium. Smoke and debris filled the air. Dominion elite guards, armored in heavy exosuits, surrounded the crash site, weapons raised. Fire. The captain screamed. A storm of laser fire engulfed the pods. For a moment, there was only noise and light. Then the smoke swirled. A black blur shot out. Nyx decapitated the captain before he could blink. Aera followed, her wings acting like shields, deflecting the laser blasts as she plowed through the line of guards. They were unstoppable. They moved like liquid death, painting the pristine white floors with red. The elevator is locked, Aera shouted, throwing a guard off the balcony. They have sealed the upper levels. Nyx looked up at the elevator shaft that went up another 100 floors. Then we climb. She extended her claws, digging them into the metal wall of the shaft. They ascended with impossible speed, tearing through blast doors and security grids. Meanwhile, in orbit, the battle was intensifying. The Dominion had deployed their secret weapon, a Titan-class dreadnought, the Hand of Justice, rising from a hidden moon base. It was huge, armed with a planet cracker cannon. Commander Vora's voice was urgent. The dreadnought is charging its main gun. It's aiming for us. If they fire, they will vaporize the flagship. Marcus gritted his teeth. Divert all power to forward shields. Prepare to ram. Vora hesitated. Ram? Marcus, this ship is biological. It will feel pain. Marcus gripped the railing. It's a warrior, Vora. Let it fight. He pushed the throttle forward. The Obsidian King surged, diving towards the rising dreadnought. The Dominion captain panic-fired. The beam grazed the Obsidian King, burning a massive scar along its hull, but the ancient ship regenerated the armor in seconds. Brace for impact, Marcus yelled. The Obsidian King slammed into the hand of justice. It didn't just crash, it bit. The bioship's hull extended tendrils, piercing the steel of the dreadnought, tearing it apart from the inside. Explosions bloomed across the enemy ship as its reactor went critical. Target destroyed, Marcus whispered, watching the burning wreckage fall away into the void. Vora, status on the ground team? They have breached the council chamber, Vora reported. Inside the highest room of the spire, the doors melted inward. High Counselor Valeri and his 6 ministers huddled behind a desk, trembling. Nyx and Aera stepped through the molten metal, their armor scorched but their bodies unharmed. They looked like nightmares given form. Nyx walked up to Valeri, lifting him by his expensive collar. "My people," she hissed, her red eyes boring into his soul. "You kept us in cages. You drained our blood. You sold us as pets." Valeri stammered, It was necessary. For stability. For peace." Aera laughed, kicking the desk aside. "Peace? You call slavery peace?" She raised her hand to strike, to end him right there. "Stop." Marcus's voice boomed over the comms link in the room. Nyx froze, her claw an inch from Valeri's throat. A hologram of Marcus appeared in the center of the room. "Don't kill him, Nyx. If you kill him, he becomes a martyr. The Dominion will fight forever." Nyx snarled, looking at the hologram. "He deserves death. He deserves worse," Marcus said, cold and calm. "He deserves to be nothing." Marcus looked at Valeri. "I am broadcasting this to every screen in the galaxy. The Dominion is dissolved. The Outer Rim is free. And you?" Marcus looked at the terrified politicians. "You are going to prison. Not a luxury cell. The mines. Sector 9. Where I came from. You're going to work for your water." Nyx slowly lowered Valeri. The counselor collapsed, weeping. It was over. The surrender order went out minutes later. The fighting stopped. The ships held their fire. 3 days later, the Obsidian King hovered silently over the capital city. The fires were out. A provisional government was being formed by the rebel factions. On the observation deck, Marcus stood looking down at the world he had conquered. He felt tired. He wasn't a mechanic anymore, but he wasn't sure if he was a king either. The doors opened and the 3 sisters walked in. They weren't wearing armor. They wore ceremonial robes of the Vrukai, flowing and regal. "The fleet is awaiting orders, Commander," Vora said softly. "The galaxy is big. There are still warlords, slavers, and remnants of the old regime." Marcus turned to them. "We're not conquerors," he said. "We're guardians. We keep the peace. But we do it my way. No cages. No slaves." Nyx walked up to him. She was taller than him, dangerous and beautiful. She placed a hand on his chest. "You led us to victory, Marcus. You broke the chains. The Vrukai respect strength. But more than that." She leaned down, her lips brushing his ear. "We respect the man who didn't treat us like monsters." Aera smirked, leaning against the doorway. "Don't get too sentimental, sister. We still have a galaxy to fix. And I'm bored." Marcus smiled. He looked at the stars. "Bored? Don't worry, Aera. I have a feeling this was just the tutorial." He walked to the center of the room, surrounded by the 3 deadliest beings in the universe, who were now his loyal vanguard. "Plot a course for the Outer Rim," Marcus ordered. "Let's go see what else is hiding in the dark." The engines hummed. The stars stretched into lines of light. And the mechanic from Sector 9, the man who was given death for his birthday, flew off into the infinite, not as a victim but as the master of the Dark Fleet.